In this video, I'm going to share with you the 5 stages of chronic pelvic pain. If you're a man or a woman suffering from chronic pelvic pain, pudendal neuralgia, non-bacterial prostatitis, or any of the mystery symptoms associated with CPPS, then this video is specifically for you. My name is Christian St. John. I spent nearly 3 years and over $50,000 to recover from chronic pelvic pain, so you don't have to. If you'd like access to my free training on how I was able to beat CPPS, be sure to go ahead and grab that down below. I'm about to share the 5 stages of chronic pelvic pain that I had to go through in order to recover. These are the exact stages that you must advance through if you plan to heal. And if you stick with me until the end of this video, you're going to be able to determine exactly which stage you're in right now. I'll also reveal a secret hack that some men and women are using right now to skip stages, ultimately accelerating their healing. So let's jump in. I knew that I just couldn't give up on it. Completely healed, completely changed, totally transformed, back at the gym, lifting weights, working out. Most importantly, I'm just living a normal life. You have to believe you can heal. So let's cover the 5 stages of chronic pelvic pain, helping you to determine exactly which stage you're in right now, as well as what you can do about it. Stage number 1, the unaware stage. In this stage of chronic pelvic pain, you have no idea that chronic pelvic pain is on its way, but it doesn't mean that something isn't brewing under the surface. Now, if you're watching this video, you're obviously not in the unaware stage. And you might be thinking, well, Christian, why are you listing this as one of the stages for me to identify if I'm already aware that I'm having challenges? The reason why it's so important for us to list unaware as the first stage is because the goal for us here at Pelvic Heal is to help you to ultimately determine what your root cause or root causes of chronic pelvic pain are. And oftentimes the root causes of chronic pelvic pain might be there for you months ago, years ago, or even decades ago. This unaware stage is the most important stage of chronic pelvic pain. So I want to cover some scenarios that you might have gone through in this unaware stage to see if this resonates with you. So in this stage, you may have experienced some injuries, perhaps sports injuries, joint injuries, or traumas through surgeries. Perhaps you experienced injuries with your knees, or maybe you had foot or ankle injuries in this particular stage. These injuries can be very traumatic, and over time, they can contribute to different types of pain and chronic pelvic pain. In my particular case, I've had about 9 surgeries in my lifetime. Sports injuries, different accidents that I've had, hernias, etc. So over time, these injuries and these surgeries that we go through can start to accumulate stress within the body that can potentially show up as chronic pain or chronic pelvic pain down the road, especially if our body becomes out of alignment. Or maybe you were very active many years ago or as a child. Maybe you were an athlete, and once you graduated high school or college, maybe you became somewhat of a corporate person and you're just sitting at a desk all day long. A lot of people go from very active to sedentary. So it's overly active to just sitting down all day, 8 hours, 10 hours a day. This can create some problems, and it can be an underlying cause. In my case, during the pandemic, I was completely inactive. My pool was taken away, the gym was taken away, I was working from home. So I went from being a very active person to essentially being very sedentary overnight. And it wasn't even until I was aware that I was having some strange symptoms and eventually pain that I was able to make some adjustments to my posture, to my sitting, focused on standing more and moving to a standing desk. The problem is, by that time, it was already too late and my chronic pelvic pain was a major problem. There are people out there that are extremely flexible. They're big into yoga. Maybe you've practiced yoga for most of your life and you've become, to some extent, overly flexible, or what's known as hypermobile. Sometimes this can create damage to the joints and can cause pain, especially if your pelvis is out of alignment. Perhaps you've experienced some triggering medical conditions in the past that might have started the cascade for you, leading to chronic pelvic pain. Medical conditions such as hernias or multiple hernias. If you're a female, perhaps you've suffered from prolapses, or perhaps you started experiencing changes or pelvic pain after giving birth to your child. Perhaps you have underlying medical conditions such as autoimmune conditions that have been with you for a majority of your life, or perhaps you even have a compromised immune system. These underlying medical conditions can be contributing factors to what one day arises as chronic pelvic pain. Or maybe you haven't been through any of those experiences, but perhaps you've just led a very stressful life up until this point. In this stage, perhaps you went through career stress, stress with family, stress with relationships, and it doesn't have to be a major event, but that low-level stress over a period of years and eventually decades can accumulate in the body and present itself as chronic pain and chronic pelvic pain. In my case, when I look back on the past 20 plus years or so from my work career, I realized that many of the jobs that I've had within various industries have been quite stressful. I tend to gravitate towards that. So while this can be exhilarating and exciting, it can often wear you down. So perhaps you've had a very stressful career. Think about the last 10, 20, 30 years in your particular career. What does that look like for you? Has it been pretty steady or has it been very stressful? This low-level stress can build up over time, manifesting into chronic pelvic pain. And you have to understand that all of this chronic low-level stress over a period of years and decades can develop into muscle tension that's happening behind the scenes in this stage. In the case of chronic pelvic pain, often what happens is there's a protective guarding or a low-level twitching that's happening under the surface that people aren't even aware of. It could be the muscles of the pelvic floor are in a low-level spasm state. They're not spasming because they want to, they're spasming because it's a biological response to that low-level stress that's been accumulating over time. In this unaware stage, maybe you're experiencing some traumas, some abuse, or even some neglect. This could potentially even go back to your childhood, and if you've had a very tough upbringing. And if you don't think that these stored emotions and this trauma and this abuse and this neglect can develop into chronic pelvic pain, think again. Remember, the body keeps the score. Stage number 2. The problem stage and the search. In this stage, you're aware that something's just not right, but you're not exactly sure what it is, and you're beginning to search for answers. This might happen after some sort of a triggering event. Perhaps it was an injury, maybe it was some discomfort or pain after a sexual encounter, or maybe it happens after a cold or an infection or something like that you've dealt with. At the beginning of my problem stage, I started to experience very strange symptoms with intimacy. Anytime I would go through that, it was almost like a laser beam type feeling down below, which was just very, very bizarre. So I knew something wasn't right and I started to track it. And then eventually that laser beam feeling turned into a discomfort. And eventually that discomfort turned into a raw, burning pain and a dull, achy pain. And it started to grow and intensify, and then it began to stay with me over time. So I knew that I had a very big problem. So in this stage, you're aware that you have a problem and you're searching for answers. You're going to get checked out. Maybe you've been to your primary doctor, or perhaps in this stage you've gone to specialists. If you're a man, maybe you've been to one or multiple urologists. Or if you're a woman, maybe it's a urogynecologist that you've been to. Or if you're still in pain, maybe you've gone to a pain doctor or a pain specialist. So your search continues in this stage. It's usually in this stage during that search that you're told by one or multiple doctors that there's nothing wrong and they can't physically find anything wrong with you. In this stage, perhaps you've undergone a series of tests like MRIs or CT scans. Maybe you had some x-rays. Maybe you've had some tests for infections done at the specialist to see if there's an infection present. Your anxiety continues to build, often making your pain worse. That brings us to stage number 3. Enter the valley of despair. In this stage, you're absolutely exhausted. It's now been months or even years or longer, and you've been suffering with chronic pelvic pain. You're beginning to lose hope in this stage. In this stage, you feel totally let down by the medical community. In this stage, perhaps you've started to deplete your savings on medical treatments that have not worked for you. In this stage, maybe you've had to cut back on work because the pain is just so brutal that you cannot get through the workday. Or maybe you've taken a leave of absence. Or maybe you've even had to leave your job or quit or even retire due to the pain. In this stage, you're growing very pessimistic, frustrated, angry, or even enraged with what's happening to you. In this stage, you don't even want to leave the house. Maybe you're wearing sweatpants or pajamas or shorts all day, like I was, just to give yourself some comfort. In this stage, maybe you're taking on the identity of a sufferer. Maybe you're taking on the identity of someone that's going to be stuck with chronic pelvic pain for life. And maybe you're about to give up. What we found is that most people wind up getting stuck in the valley of despair for years. This is the absolute worst stage to be in. If you're in the valley of despair, you know that you're there. When I was in this stage, I experienced everything that I just mentioned to you. I was unable to leave the house. I was in excruciating pain. I was standing all day, every day, because I was unable to sit like this without having electric style shocks and knife pain inside my urethra. I couldn't wait for the days to end just so I can get to bed and medicate myself to get to sleep. In fact, lying down at night was the only relief that I had. It was so miserable, and the days turned to weeks, the weeks turned into months, and the months turned into years, and I just wondered, when am I going to be able to get out of this valley of despair? And the valley of despair is the most dangerous stage to be in, because what happens is the longer that someone spends in the valley of despair, the less and less hope that they have that they can actually get out of chronic pelvic pain. In fact, I see so many men and women that are just stuck in the valley of despair for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years plus, and as those years go on, their light becomes dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. If you're watching this and if you're in this valley of despair right now with chronic pelvic pain, know that this is the most dangerous stage to be in. And know that the most important thing you can do for yourself right now is to get out of this valley of despair. It doesn't mean that you're going to heal overnight and everything's going to change for you overnight, but if you can just make that mental shift to get out of the valley of despair right now, you're going to be better off and you're going to be on the path of healing. But you have to believe that you can get out. It starts here. And remember, if you're stuck in the valley of despair, or maybe you're problem aware right now and you're afraid to death of falling into the valley of despair, get a good coach, link up with someone who's been there and been through it and is now on the other side. It doesn't have to be us, it can be anybody, but just make sure you're with someone who has a proven system that can help you to accelerate through these cycles, because it's not about the information, it's about the implementation of that information. And a good coach with a great system can help you. And that brings us to stage number 4, cautious optimism. In this stage, something minor happens that allows you to make a mental shift in a positive direction. In this stage, because you've been to so many doctors before and so many specialists before, and you've had so many tests done, and you've been through all of these different treatments and nothing has helped. In this stage, you start to become open-minded to the prospects that there might not actually be tissue damage, or there may not actually be something physically wrong with you. In this stage, you start to recognize some minor wins, some minor changes to the way you feel, things that are centered around calming your nervous system and mindfulness and just really relaxing yourself. I remember for me, when I used to get these deep tissue massages, full body sports massages, I would feel amazing after. And one of the worst symptoms that I had was burning with urination, just constant. Every time I would urinate, it would be horrific burning. And then after these massages, I noticed that the burning would go away. And sometimes it would only go away for 30 minutes, sometimes an hour if I was lucky. But this was a clue to me that, hey, maybe this isn't an infection. Maybe this isn't a disease. Maybe there's really nothing wrong down there. And maybe this really has to do with me tapping into a different realm, whether it's my nervous system, whether it's my psychology, or the neuroscience that we teach on. So it could be a very minor shift for you in this cautiously optimistic stage that starts to move you in the right direction and move you out of that valley of despair. So again, if you're stuck in that valley of despair, I want you to think about, have you had any minor wins, minor scenarios or situations where you're thinking, wow, I actually felt a little bit better after I did X, Y, or Z. Why is that? You have to start to become somewhat of a detective and unpack all of these scenarios to get yourself out of that valley of despair, because it is the most dangerous stage. So why is this the cautiously optimistic stage instead of just the optimistic stage? The reason why is because when you're in this stage, you're still suffering from setbacks. When I was in this stage, I was still suffering. I still had pain with sitting. I still had knife pain. I still had burning and pain with urination. But what I discovered in this stage was there were certain periods of time that my pain would subside. So in this stage, you begin to become cautiously optimistic that there's a way out. You begin to have a more positive outlook, and you begin to have belief and bring back hope into your life that you can actually get out of this nightmare. This brings us to stage number 5, freedom. Freedom from chronic pelvic pain. In this stage, you've now taken on the identity of someone that's free from chronic pelvic pain. In this stage, you've now released the identity of a sufferer. That is no longer your identity. In this stage, you're consistently practicing alternative modalities such as rewiring your brain, calming your nervous system, and working on releasing any stored emotional traumas that may be in your body. In this stage, you're consistently practicing a daily stretch routine that's focused on stripping muscle tension from your body and stripping muscle tension from the major muscle groups that contribute to chronic pelvic pain. In this stage, pain no longer controls you. You've learned to care for your body. You've learned to care for your mind. You've learned to reprogram your mind, and you've learned how to calm your nervous system. In this stage, you may not be 100% pain-free, but living with chronic pelvic pain is no longer your identity. In this stage, you've moved on. You're no longer focused on chronic pelvic pain. In this stage, you're enjoying life. In this stage, you're bringing in joy and new opportunities and new experiences in your life. It is very positively focused in this stage. In this stage, if any symptoms may arise from time to time, you now have the tools to knock them out like that. In this stage, you're now much stronger, you're more in tune with your body, and you're more resilient than ever. In this stage, you're back to normal life. You're back to work. In this stage, your energy levels have restored, or in some cases have even improved. In this stage, you're able to spend more time with your partner, more time with your children, more time with your friends, and more time with your family. In this stage, you're able to go out and enjoy life without worry. In this stage, you're able to sit down at restaurants without fear of having to be in pain. In this stage, you're not having to map out where the nearest bathrooms are every time you want to go out and enjoy. In this stage, you're able to eat what you want. In this stage, you're able to drink what you want without having to worry about flare-ups. In this stage, you're able to enjoy your favorite foods. In this stage, you're able to sit down and you're able to travel on planes and sit for hours on end with no concern whatsoever. In this stage, you're able to travel again. And in this stage, you're able to go to those places that you dreamed of. In this stage, you're able to start checking off that bucket list. In this stage, you're living the life you were meant to live. In this stage, you're living the life you deserve to live. In this stage, you're living a life even better than you were before. In this stage, you're living the life beyond your wildest dreams. In this stage, you're finally free from chronic pelvic pain. Our goal is for you to get to the freedom stage as quickly as possible. And at Pelvic Heal, we work with our clients, regardless of what stage they're in, to help accelerate their path to the freedom stage. But now I want to discuss some of the pitfalls that you may come across along your healing journey. You have to understand that healing is not linear, and you can cycle back and forth in between any of these stages at various times. In fact, most people do this, and this happened to me as well. What we found at Pelvic Heal is that most people actually go from the valley of despair to cautiously optimistic, back to the valley of despair, to cautiously optimistic, and back to the valley of despair, and so on and so forth. So what I experienced with my own journey and now with working at clients here at Pelvic Heal is that healing from chronic pelvic pain is not linear. This is important for you to understand as you are progressing through the phases of your own healing journey. This means that you're not simply going to cycle from stage 1 to stage 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. You may actually go in and out of these phases at various times in your healing journey. And it's very important for you to not only understand these phases, but to believe in these phases and to know which phase you're in right now. For instance, if you're stuck in the valley of despair right now, the most important thing for you to do is to get out of that phase as soon as possible. Now, if you're cautiously optimistic right now, what we found is that many people, myself included, will actually tinker back and forth from cautiously optimistic to the valley of despair. Then they'll spend a lot more time in the valley of despair, something positive may happen, they become cautiously optimistic again, and then something negative happens, the pain comes back, they have a few bad days, a bad week, maybe a bad month, and whammo, they're back down into the valley of despair. So as you can see, healing is not linear. It almost looks like a stock chart, up and down, up and down. So what we want to do is we want to make that chart as smooth as possible for you. We're not saying it's going to be a straight line up. It's not going to be instantaneous victory. There are going to be setbacks along the way, but with the proper guidance and coaching and accountability, you can have a smoother journey to get through these phases, ultimately getting you to freedom as quickly as possible. And what we found, unfortunately, is that for most people, it's just a lot easier for them to hang on to a story, to hold on to a story of a sufferer, to hang on to an identity of someone suffering with chronic pelvic pain. That's just a whole lot easier than actually doing the work to dig out of the valley of despair. So we're not saying this is going to be easy. It wasn't easy for me. It took me 3 years and over $50,000 to figure this out on my own. But what we are saying is, with some guidance and with some help and with some implementation coaching and accountability coaching along the way, it is possible to get there way faster for a fraction of the cost and with way less heartache and way less suffering. So now I want to talk to you about a secret hack to either get out of the valley of despair or to skip the valley of despair altogether. So what we found is that men and women that use this secret hack are able to avoid the valley of despair altogether, or at least minimize the time in this dreaded stage. So here it is. The secret of getting out of the valley of despair is very simple, but it's very profound. It's rejecting the identity of someone who's suffering with chronic pelvic pain for life. That's it. I never accepted that chronic pelvic pain was going to be my identity for life. I always knew that I would find a way to get out from chronic pelvic pain. I didn't know how long it would take. I thought maybe it would take 5 years or 10 years, but in my mind, I knew it would take as long as I needed it to take, and that eventually I would get out from chronic pelvic pain. Do I wish I was able to get out of it in 3 months instead of nearly 3 years? Absolutely. It just wasn't the case. I guess I wasn't smart enough. That's okay. That was my journey. But the secret is to reject the identity of being a sufferer. If you reject the identity that you're going to be stuck with chronic pelvic pain for life, you'll be able to make a mental shift and you'll be able to be open to some new modalities to get out of the valley of despair, or to even skip the valley of despair altogether. Going from problem aware and the search to cautiously optimistic and then eventually free from chronic pelvic pain. And if you've been stuck in the valley of despair and not knowing what to do, or maybe you're just in the problem stage right now and you're searching for answers like I was, and maybe you're scared to death about entering that valley of despair now that you realize what is ahead of you, consider getting a coach. Find someone that's been through this. Find someone that's on the other side, and find someone that's made it to stage 5, freedom from chronic pelvic pain. That's why we put together the pain recycling system. It's the exact system that I use to get out from chronic pelvic pain. If you have a proven system and you have a proven roadmap and you have some accountability attached to it, what you'll find is that you'll be able to cycle through these phases of chronic pelvic pain much faster. The key is to align yourself with people that have actually done the work and have gotten themselves to stage 5, the freedom stage. You see, if you're constantly hanging around people that are suffering and people that are complaining and people that are negative, you're only going to continue to attract that. And remember, it's not about the information, it's about the implementation of the information that's going to get you through these phases much faster. You can do it on your own like I did, but it can take years and it can take tens of thousands of dollars. There is a better way. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please let us know what stage or stages you're going through right now in the comments below. And if you've made it to stage 5, freedom from pelvic pain, be sure to let us know about your story down below as well.